This presentation does not and is not intended to constitute legal advice, nor does it create an attorney-client relationship. It is offered for general informational purposes only. This presentation constitutes a fair use of any copyrighted materials pursuant to Title 17 U.S.C. Section 107, Fair Use Exemption, and any other provision of U.S. copyright law which may apply.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Garuda Dasa, and I have here with me Gupta Ji. Here is a little background on Gupta Ji before we hear from him. Gupta Ji's initial connection with Krishna Bhaktas was in New York City very early on in 1967 to 1968 and was initiated by Srila Prabhupada in 1973. He earned a bachelor's degree in psychology with a biochemistry minor from University of Arizona. He attended Pepperdine School of Law and admitted to the California bar in 1980s. He has 35 years of litigation experience in California and the federal courts. He also was involved in the evaluation of over 600 ISKCON Gurukul abuse claims in role of special master for the U.S. Bankruptcy Court in California and West Virginia. He represented Gupta Dasa in the 1997-1998 California litigation concerning the validity of the California Bhaktivedanta Book Trust. And he formed Krishna Books Incorporated, a nonprofit which has printed and distributed over 10 million authorized and approved pre-1978 literary works of Srila Prabhupada. I first met Gupta Ji in Berkeley in February of 2020, where I was holding the symposium on the posthumous editing of a great master's work with special focus on the works of Srila Prabhupada at the Graduate Theological Union. Gupta Ji made an important, impromptu, unscheduled appearance to educate the 14 scholars attending on the legal implications of the posthumous editing that has been occurring in the BBT. Gupta Ji will be contributing a chapter entitled The Acharya's Copyrights, Legal Implications of Irresponsible Publishing, to the forthcoming book for which I'm the editor that will be publishing the papers presented at the Berkeley Symposium. Gupta Ji will also be contributing another chapter entitled The ISKCON Publisher, Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, to my forthcoming edited volume from Oxford University Press entitled The Worldwide Krishna Movement, Collected Essays on Half a Century of Growth, Impact, and Challenge. Thank you so much for coming here, Gupta Ji.
Well, first I'd like to thank you for hosting, Garuda. I appreciate that. And a hearty welcome to all of our viewers. The Acharya Copyright Series was put together in order to explore a 55-year history of the publishing history of the literary works of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, who, of course, is the founder Acharya of ISKCON. And it's based on an in-depth review and analysis of publicly available materials. And that's very important to understand, that it is based on publicly available materials. So far as the importance of it in general is that it's probably, I would say, the most significant really issue in the movement, in the sense that it affects directly the trajectory of the movement, what happens with the books, what is placed in the books, how they're the extent of the distribution, and so on. So this topic includes and is intertwined with two major issues. I'm going to be speaking on and addressing the legal issues associated with the author's IPR. And when I say author or Acharya, I'm of course referring to A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. And this context really has to do with the editing issue, the changes. These are intertwined, and we will discuss those a little bit later. But my initial interest in this area really was spurned in mid 2017 on behalf of my client and the licensee Krishna Books Inc. (KBI). We received a letter from the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, the ISKCON publisher, which basically said they had no further legal authority to allow KBI to print and publish books. I thought that basically not only odd, but it was wholly unsupportable by the letter. And after going back and forth a bit with them, I decided that rather than focus on any kind of a litigation associated with the licensing issues of KBI, which we're being put one step back, we could take one step forward after some time and great deal of money being spent on that kind of litigation and arbitration, we'd basically end up at the same place. And considering, all of our clocks are running, I decided that it would be more productive to focus on researching and looking at the history of the copyrights and to get a better handle on that. So that's basically what sort of pushed me towards that.
Okay, good. Well, let me ask you, you seem to allude to this, that this issue is so important because, well, why? Because Prabhupada's Vani is everything to the bhaktas, right? Prabhupada said, you'll know me, you'll continue to have me present in your lives through my Vani. But now we see that there's this continued unauthorized posthumous editing that's going on in the books. And this, of course, as you know, I've been very involved with this about the same time you started getting involved, around 2017. We didn't know each other then, but it seemed that our interests in this whole issue concurrently began around the same time. I think what I'm especially interested in, and I think many will be here, is how the legal situation or the history of BBT corporately, or however you want to put it, has maybe enabled or facilitated the sort of free form, in some ways, a kind of, a kind of a collective editing of Prabhupada's books. They throw something out into the public. Would this be okay? And I mean, it was a strange, very strange. On the one hand, the editor seemed to take full autocratic authority, and then it seemed to take a form of voting in the public. Would this be preferred or that be preferred? And Prabhupada already established his books. He already published his books. So where do we begin with all of this? I mean, how do we understand the relationship?
Well, I had the same issue, basically, that I was facing. And it seemed to me that the first place to start would be to actually review what is the history, what are the facts, and what is the law associated with this issue. And that took me on that started in 2017, so that's taken me almost 5 years now. 4 years, practically full time. And in order to gather that information, it was necessary to look at over 100 titles. That means I accumulated information on 100 titles plus all of the editions and printings associated with each of those titles that went from 1966 through to the present. And going forward with that, that brought up more issues, which focused my attention then on looking through and researching all of the Back to Godheads and the
Hmm.
GBC resolutions. And in order to keep that into perspective, it was it became necessary then to understand much more about the author's position. And to do
Hmm.
that, I reviewed all of his letters through the letters book, and not
Hmm.
just a digital review, but an actual review of the prose itself in hard copy form. I also looked through um, and we researched the lectures and eventually the conversations. The conversations had to be pegged, of course, and flagged as to the issues that we were looking at. But all of that information was basically necessary in order to get a beginning handle on what we were looking at, what we would be looking at.
Hmm.
Um, that then segued into a complete review of U.S. Copyright Office records. Those records include the registrations, assignments, and correspondence.
Hmm.
Um, and that began a context for what was going on legally, and so much more information. I had also had been involved with a number of litigations associated with the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust. There was four major cases. I had files on those cases. There were actually
Hmm.
five cases, and they had to be reviewed because those cases included representations under oath, affidavits made by the parties that had to be associated relationally with all of the other information, which means the development of various databases in order to
Hmm.
see what that meant. And then the hardest part, besides collecting information and pulling it together, was the fact that this area of intellectual property rights is a very complex area, and it's not. It's complex because there's not a whole lot of black letter law. In other words, you don't just go like in contracts. You can get 100 books on how contracts work. You can't really get that with intellectual property rights. That means that you have to look at the treatises rather that were involved, the various copyright acts that were extant during the periods of time that books were printed or published or written. And you also had to look at um, other uh, other IPR material that was which was basically case based. And of course,
Hmm.
copyright actions are handled solely in the federal courts, which have exclusive subject matter jurisdiction. So
Hmm.
federal courts hear these kinds of cases, and that segued a little further into trademark issues and issues involving sound recordings. So this is why it's taken a long time. 4 years is a long time to research a case. It took me almost a year and a half to even see whether or not it was worth pursuing. And after about a first year and a half, it was clear that not only is it worth pursuing, but there was so much information um, in plain view. It was in the records that anyone could obtain, that we just hadn't really been looking at that. So I'd say that was the lion's share of what's been happening so far.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds immensely complex. I mean, it sounds like you've collected a huge amount of material. I mean, am I getting the right impression here? I mean,
If you count maybe 100
bank
gigs of
boxes.
data as, excuse me?
How many bank boxes of files, for example? I mean, do you have physical files?
Yes, there's between 75 and 80 banker boxes uh, filling up a 5 by 8 storage unit, which is the repository, as well as
Right.
on other pallets in places that I travel, so I can look at those materials. And it also involves something close to 100 gigs of data because much of this information
Hmm.
had to be scanned and then characterized and available by reference through various databases. And so all of this process, as each day went on, it became more complex, but more fulfilling because there's more information. I would kind of liken it to painting a picture. If we look at, if we think of what generally the devotee community knows about the BBT and the history, let's just say it was 100 dots on a painting. After this material was obtained, I would say it would be like 10,000 dots of material on the painting. So the picture that you paint when you connect 10 dots is very different than when you connect rather 10,000 dots.
Right.
And as far as I know, this has not, it hadn't been done before. If it has been done, it's been a great secret because the 55-year history of the copyrights also involves many different people, many different devotees doing different things during different periods with different ideas about what to do. But I don't believe that there had been an overview, a bird's eye view, so to speak, if I can use that term, for what the picture really shows. And that's why it took so long, and that's why we're here now to talk about it.
Marvelous. Well, this is. I'm excited to find out what all this adds up to. What it really means. Again, I'm not a very educated person on the legal side of things or corporate side of things, and probably a lot of listeners are not. What if I were to ask you, um, what about the moral rights of an author? I mean, is that an okay question to ask? I mean, is that involved here? The moral rights of an author?
Uh,
I mean, Gupta
it
ji,
is.
I'm an author, and I don't want anyone touching my work, improving my work after I'm dead. Honestly,
Okay, so we'll I can touch on that now. One of the upcoming video series videos will have a rather deep discussion about this issue of the moral rights associated in the West with books. In the East, we refer to this as more as the Arsha Prayog approach, in which an Acharya's work would never, ever be adjusted by anyone. If anything, there might be a commentary or a tika, which would be added as a separate item, perhaps in another book or in the book in a different place. But an author um, would have to be credited with that tika. Not just anyone could write whatever they wanted, and we would never know. So in the Western system, of course, a lot of this has to do with the expurgation associated with Shakespeare work later, but initially had to do with the French system of moral rights, which were called moraux, and those rights were very basic, and they were very similar to the rights that were available under in the Eastern system. And just to touch on two now, the key rights that every devotee, I'm sure, listening to this can relate to is one is attribution. The first one is attribution, which basically means that an author has the right to have their work attributed to them. A very simple, uh, direct, direct reality that should be done. And as we can see with the changed books, it's sort of the converse of it, where others have changed the books in ways that are substantive, and those words are attributed to the author, which is wholly improper. And then, of course, the second moral right that is a key right, which is the right of integrity. Um, and that right basically says that an author is the only one who can change or make any changes to the substance of their work. An author must approve changes to their creative work. No one else has the right to do that. And that has been wholesale violated uh, since the 80s, and arguably since the 70s. And there's so much information in the public record about those topics, which we will be discussing in due course.
wow. Well, we got just a tiny glimpse into how much work you have been doing. Just the enormity of the collected sources and so on is staggering. I'm almost afraid to ask you how much more is there to do. I mean, is there a point, a saturation point here?
Not for a lawyer. I think that you can go all the way to trial and appeal and still be discovering new information, but realistically, the lion's share of the factual materials have been obtained. Uh, uh, there's more to do, but um, it's very specific. Some of the missing parts of it, which um, which will take the devotee community realistically to be able to pitch in on some of that material. And also on the legal side, that's a continuing process depending on what happens and depending on where this goes. But I would like to say that it's the editing issue and the results of the IPR research uh, are inextricably intertwined. It turns out they really are a hand in glove. And I've written something down like just to read because it's very specific about how I view this issue of after all of this research and sitting with this for so many years, reviewing it. And I would say that the status of the author's copyrights has a direct consequential impact on the ISKCON publisher's positional claim that it wields exclusive, unassailable authority over the author's literary works. I'll read that once more. um, the status of the author's copyrights has a direct consequential impact on the ISKCON publisher's positional claim that it wields exclusive, unassailable authority over the author's literary works. In other words, what we found through the copyright research is that the author doesn't is the putative author, but there's a wealth of historical and legal information which contains overwhelming evidence that they are not actually the exclusive copyright holder. And that, of course, is the subject of these videos.
Well, I can say that this is going to be extremely valuable for everyone to understand. Um, what about the? I don't know if this is appropriate to ask you, but what about any potential or possible interaction with the BBT the current directors of the BBT now? Now, of course, the whole structure of the BBT, what the BBT is, what it was, what the I guess it's the BBTI. I don't know. I don't know how I'm a novice at this. What all this is about and its implications, the corporate changes. I don't understand any of this. It was a trust, now it's a corporation, something like that. Will you eventually address that in one of your discourses?
Yeah, that's a substantive issue. That's a very important issue as to the nature of the entities that are involved, what happened with the trusts, what their position is, the fact that they've been divested of all of the property, even though we still call it the BBT. It's actually a nonprofit corporation called the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust International Inc. in California. And there are a number of videos that will be presented on those specific issues. And of course, the background to that will also be reviewed, which is based on the GBC's actions and their various resolutions. And that's why I refer to the BBT many times, basically as the ISKCON publisher. I would say that the BBT is more a euphemism that's been carried forward. And those devotees who were involved with the BBT are obviously great devotees who spent so much time and energy working through under difficult circumstances from the beginning to get the books printed, published, sorted out, and distributed. And my comments regarding this structure and the history really comes down to a core group of, quote, managers and their role in what happened. And it happened over many years, so there are many different people involved. But this criticism, so to speak, and uncovering of the historical and legal side of the BBT really mostly has to do with decisions that were made that were, I think, at the end, the least one would say is they were inappropriate. So yes, that will all be looked at. I'll be covering this in as an anthology, basically a chronological approach from 1966 in various periods of time through to the present, including touching on some key issues that we need to review that were pre-1965, 1966, when in Prabhupada's earlier work. And what else? And we'll be focused on this information, and we're doing it really as a discourse because this is really something that needs to be reflected on. It's a huge worldwide devotee community issue. It needs to be sorted out. It needs to be sorted out soon, and it's going to be sorted out soon. The devotees who are involved with trying to get this issue back on track are going to be supported by this information. The issue of editing that goes on, that there's just been talk for decades now and nothing changes, is going to change. And one way or the other, it will change. And this information is going to show us how to do that.
It's going to change by not doing any more changes.
That's a good way of putting it. It's going to change because either one way or another, at the end of this process, okay, original books will be published. Okay. I can't tell you that the ISKCON institution and the ISKCON publisher won't continue to make changes, but I think it will be obvious after understanding more about what actually happened that that also is a possibility amongst reasonable people.
Right, right. Well, wonderful. This is, I'm excited for these discourses, Gupta ji. And I want to mention to everyone out there that I've invited Gupta ji to contribute to two books that I'm putting together. One is a book on the half century of the worldwide Krishna movement that is likely to be published by Oxford University Press. In that volume, Gupta ji has contributed a chapter called Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, History of the ISKCON Publisher. And then in another book, likely to be published by Lexington Books, I'm sort of still in the process of that. He's publishing another chapter. I'm trying to look at it. Oh, right here. The Acharya's Copyrights, Legal Implications of Irresponsible Publishing. So some of the title of this discourse series is kind of split up between these two articles or chapters of books that I'm publishing. So this is a nice start, a nice launch. Sorry for any of the technical Zoom issues. I'm not sure. We'll have to check all that out, see how that worked. But I want to thank the many devotees who support this effort to resolve the posthumous editing issue consistent with the instructions and directives of Srila Prabhupada, many of whom have played an essential role in bringing this discourse series into the public forum. So my thanks goes out to them. Our thanks goes out to them. And if any of you would like to contribute to this effort, let us know. In the meantime, Gupta ji, we will look forward to next week, right? We'll try to make this weekly as best as possible.
As best as possible. I think we're going to, as we've spoken, Garuda Prabhu, is that the format would be something like 30 to 40 minutes for the substantive discussions versus this introduction. And if we can do it, we'd like to be able to entertain questions. I think there are going to be a lot of people who are going to be asking questions, so that will have to be sorted out in some way, maybe reviewed before they're sent to you, so that we can whittle it down to questions that deal with that subject matter. There's going to be a lot discussed. We can break it up into at least 12 to 20 videos, and we'll just see where that goes and what the community prefers to view.
Okay, superb, really excellent. If anyone here wants to get in touch with Gupta ji, you can, or myself for any reason, you can write to this simple address, garuda@secretyoga.com. It's very simple, garuda@secretyoga.com. Secret Yoga is a truncated form of chapter 18, verse 675 of the Bhagavad Gita, Guhyam Param Yogam, the supreme secret of yoga. So we're trying to bring out, as Krishna is bringing out the supreme secret of yoga, Gupta ji, Gupta, which means hidden, is trying to bring out the hidden history of the BBT. So following in the kind of discourse Krishna himself gave in the Bhagavad Gita. So this is wonderful. Thank you so much, Gupta ji.
Well, thank you for hosting it, and thank you, listeners, for listening. Appreciate it very much.
Yeah. Till next time. Hare Krishna.